A first ever stunning admission from a woman who accused Duke University lacrosse players of raping her nearly 20 years ago. The story was a national firestorm. She now says she lied about the encounter. Crystal Mangum first made the claims back in 2006, saying 3 members of the school's lacrosse team raped her after she had been hired to dance at a house party the team was throwing. Police charged David Evans, Colin Finnerty, and Reed Seligman after Mangum's accusations. But after much back and forth and the city's DA stepping down from the case, North Carolina's Attorney General later dismissed the charges, citing a lack of evidence. But now, going on the record on a podcast nearly 20 years later, Crystal Mangum says she was lying the whole time.
I don't even have to summarize what today's video's about, because that right there should have told you the whole thing. What's crazy about stories like this is, what if these guys were found guilty? How do you ever give someone back the time that was stolen from them? Yes, there are plenty of cases in which people are proven innocent years later, and in the most extreme ones, they're granted millions of dollars. But what does that mean if you've already lost 30 or 40 years of your life? It doesn't matter how much they thicken your pockets. Everything worth a damn has already been taken from you. When you're dealing with cases of fake rape accusations like this, even if the guy is shown to be innocent, his life will forever be changed, and it's something he'll always have to carry. I remember watching a show on Netflix called Criminal UK, which is worth watching if you haven't seen it, but warning, spoilers ahead. In one of the episodes, a man gets arrested because he was accused of raping a woman, and when they brought him in, it was a spectacle, as they did it at his workplace, and everyone knew about it. But when he was proven to be innocent, as the whole thing was made up, he demanded that the officers take him back to the office. With the same energy, they pulled him out of it so that everyone knew that he wasn't a rapist. Of course they didn't, which is part of the problem for me, because now he'll be forever seen as someone who was accused of one of the most disgusting crimes. But yeah, let's get back to the video.
I testified falsely against them by saying that they raped me when they didn't, and that was wrong. And I betrayed the trust of a lot of other people who believed in me. And made up a story that wasn't true because I wanted validation from people and not from God. And that was wrong when God already loved me for who I was, regardless. I didn't need to seek validation from him because I already had validation from him. I just didn't know it. And I hurt my brothers. And I hope that they can forgive me. And I want them to know that I love them. And they didn't deserve that. And I hope they can forgive me. And that I hope that they can heal and trust God and know that God loves them, and that God is loving them through me, letting them know that they're valuable and that they didn't deserve that.
I don't know why she's talking about how much she loved those guys. She didn't even really know them. And this isn't something you'd ever do to someone you love or cared about in the slightest. She tried to send these guys to the shadow realm, and if they were convicted, they probably never would have seen the light of day again. This little apology wouldn't mean shit to me if I was one of those guys, because even though they didn't go down for it, this is something that probably followed them throughout their entire lives, because there will always be people who thought they did it and just got off on a technicality. Before we continue though, this next clip will give you a little more context into how this whole thing went down.
During spring break, when most of the students at Duke were off campus, the captains of the lacrosse team came up with the not-so-bright idea of inviting 2 strippers to perform for the players. One of them was this woman, Crystal Mangum, who we subsequently learned had very severe mental problems. She arrived, she had no particular interest in performing. It appears as if she was on some sort of combination of alcohol and prescription drugs. And the party relatively quickly turned ugly. There was a shouting match between the other dancer and members of the team. By this point, most of the guys had already left. And then the second dancer, a woman named Kim Roberts, drove off. And in a normal circumstance, no one ever would have heard of this again. But as Roberts drove off, she found out that her fellow dancer had passed out. She called the police to come and get Mangum to take her either home or to a psychological institution. Mangum, when she was awakened by the police, she was going to be admitted to a psychological institution and was prompted improperly by a nurse who asked her whether she had been raped. And Mangum, who knew the system well, said yes. She was sent to Duke Hospital and she made an allegation.
When I was in college, I made a deliberate effort to not even entertain the idea of sleeping with girls who were drunk, and it didn't matter if I was drinking myself. While I'd like to say that this is something I sort of figured out on my own, it was actually my dad who'd always go on about how you can't give anyone a reason to bring you down. And back then, there was a big thing about black men being accused of rape by white women, so it was always something he'd go on about, always saying you should be careful about the people you surround yourself with because you just never know what their intentions are. This is the exact type of situation I would have tried to avoid. But let's be honest, if I was a player on that team, maybe I would have been at the party. But once I saw drugs and intoxicated women, I would have been gone, and my interactions with them would have been kept to a minimum. The thing is though, I'm a black guy, so on a lacrosse team, I would have stood out like a sore thumb, someone who's easily identifiable, so maybe I would have been cooked regardless. Anyway, if you want to see the rest of this specific video, I'll leave a link to it in the description as it's worth a watch. But let's get back to the main report.
Joining me now is CNN's Jean Casares, who reported heavily on this case. Jean, give us a sense of how impactful and controversial these accusations and the result were at that time. I remember, you remember this story all too well. I mean, this was literally a firestorm of a story back in 2006. The entire country was watching it, and to hear this admission all these years later, it's just extraordinary.
And 3 young lives were destroyed at that time. You know, it was 2006. It was Durham, North Carolina. I was there. I was covering this. And Crystal Mangum made the accusation that she was raped by David Evans, Cullen Finnerty, and Reed Segelman. And there were charges, very serious sexual assault charges that had terms of imprisonment for the rest of their lives. And in Durham, that's where it started, and everyone took Crystal Mangum's side because she came out with details, very specific, graphic details. And the young men said, we didn't do this.
Even though rape is a horrific and disgusting crime, you should never put it past someone to lie about such a thing. While any woman reporting a crime like this should be taken seriously, it's not a good idea to just outright believe what they're saying as if it were already proven to be true. False rape accusations aren't something that most of us will ever have to worry about, but if you're extremely unlucky, you could be someone who finds themselves on the chopping block. A few years ago in the UK, 3 guys found themselves in a very similar situation due to the lies of a woman called Eleanor Williams. And the lengths she went through to ruin these guys was shocking, and 2 of them even tried to take their own lives because shit got so bad. I'm trying not to get distracted from the main report, but I can't help it when it comes to this shit.
Now, last year, 22-year-old Eleanor Williams was jailed for 8.5 years after falsely claiming she'd been raped by multiple men and trafficked by an Asian grooming gang. Her lies caused an outpouring of anger and several protests in the town of Barrow in Cumbria. And now a BBC documentary reveals the extent of her deceit. Our investigative reporter Anna Collinson has the story and a warning that you may find some of the details in this report upsetting.
I guess you probably guess what's going to happen. If you just listen to
This is the moment Eleanor Williams was arrested in 2020.
To being in breach of your court bail in relation to charges of perverting the course of justice.
A court would later find that she had repeatedly lied about being raped, which legal experts stress rarely happens.
As rare as false rape accusations are, they do happen. And it's something we shouldn't be so quick to ignore or downplay how devastating and life-changing it can be to the men it does end up affecting. The National Sexual Violence Resource Center reports that the prevalence of false reporting for sexual assault crimes is low, ranging between 2% and 10%. In 2010, the Lisak et al. Study analyzed 136 sexual assault cases reported over a 10-year period at a major northeastern university and found that 5.9% were classified as false allegations. The Lonsway, Archambault, and Lisak study in 2009 did a multi-site study of 8 U.S. communities, including 2,059 cases of sexual assault, and found a 7.1% rate of false reports. And lastly, researchers in the Heenan and Murray study back in 2006 studied 812 reports of sexual assault from 2000 to 2003 and found a 2.1% rate of false reports. Of course, the links to all these reports will be in the description so you can check them out for yourself. From these stats, you can see that false accusations are rare, but you should still be on your toes and try to avoid the kind of women who could land you in some shit like this because it's not something that's easy to come back from.
Right, so the lists are on now and we're recording. So
Exclusive police footage shows Williams' deception began 3 years earlier when she said she'd been raped at a party. She withdrew her involvement, but a year and a half later, she makes a fresh allegation.
So I was trying to push him out the door. Couldn't. He had a knife, he was waving it around.
Notice her bruised cheek, which a judge later decides is self-inflicted. Just weeks after this, she claims she's being trafficked and raped by a gang of Asian men.
Whichever man was willing to pay the most money, you go with. They tell us they can treat us how we want because they're white trash.
It was, we need to do something to help this girl. What is going on?
She describes the properties she was forced to go to in great detail.
It wasn't like a house, it was more like a roller shop. Orangey colour walls.
The police treated Williams like a victim, but suspicions began to arise after they spent 2 days driving her around a town she said she'd been recently trafficked to and was unable to provide any leads.
Was it on that route that you took us on, or was it somewhere else?
I don't know.
It's funny, because just like in Crystal Mangum's case, both accusers gave explicit details regarding what happened to them. So I wonder if this is a common thing with people who make false accusations.
Not sure.
And what it ended up being was me driving around fairly aimlessly, just in the hope that something might look familiar to Ellie. That's when I first started wondering myself personally, is there any truth in this?
The following week, her lies unravel further when police are called to her home.
You alright?
Injured and seemingly intoxicated, she makes more claims of being trafficked. An investigation takes place, and this is the innocent young man she accuses. CCTV from that night shows the pair met by chance in Preston when he asks her for a lighter. It's Williams who pursues a conversation. She's then seen on camera in Barrow-in-Furness walking home with no visible injuries. But when police arrive at her flat 20 minutes later, this is what they find.
I'll help you. I'll help you. Shall we get you an ambulance?
In court, a judge ruled these injuries were self-inflicted and that she was play acting.
Weed. There's space.
He also found there was no evidence that she was mentally unwell.
Every single allegation she made, we still investigated because there might have been some truth in some of this. And it was really important that if there was, we found it.
And I think that's the right approach to take, because you just never know. But in the court of public opinion, the guys were already marked as guilty, which ruined their lives. And I suspect that even now, there are still people who think they're guilty. So who knows if they'll ever be able to really get over it. When this story came to a head, they reported this on the Guardian website. Though Williams singled out Asian men in an incendiary Facebook post on the 20th of May in 2020, she also wrongly accused 3 white men of rape, the court heard. One of them, a trainee electrician called Oliver Gardner, met Williams just once, in what the prosecutor Jonathan Sandiford KC described as a chance encounter in Preston on the 18th of July in 2019. The jury was played CCTV footage showing a clearly drunk Gardner asking Williams for a light. The pair then briefly disappeared down a side street, with Williams seen emerging within a minute. He told the jury that the pair had had a brief sexual encounter and nothing more. In a victim impact statement read to the court, Gardner described his shock at Williams's claims. "I was being accused of being a rapist, a drug dealer, and a human trafficker," he said. Gardner said the stress of being falsely accused resulted in him being sectioned under the Mental Health Act. Then, 18 months ago, he tried to kill himself and was sectioned again. He said Williams had ruined his life. He had had one final exam to sit before becoming an electrician, but because of what happened, I was unable to continue my studies, he said. Jordan Trengove, whom Williams accused of raping her 3 times, including at knife point, said he also tried to kill himself after spending 10 weeks on remand for a crime he did not commit. "This shit's just wild to me, but I'm glad she was charged and sentenced for it, and hopefully, we don't see something like this again. But let's get back to the main story, and I promise, no more distractions."
But Duke University did not stand by them either. They were just really silent, but everyone was focused that she was telling the truth, they weren't. Then it went to a national level, and their names became household names, and they were taken into court on these very serious charges, and they were in college. They were at Duke University. Furthermore, the lacrosse team, their entire season was canceled. The coach was fired. So there were ramifications from it. Now, 1 year later, the Attorney General exonerated them of innocence. But there's so much more to the story. I was in the courtroom, and Mike Nifong, the district attorney of Durham, was charged with criminal contempt and then also for disbarment of his bar license. And it came out what the truth was. One of the defense teams had a young attorney, just got out of law school, and he would stay up at night reading the thousands of pages of DNA evidence. And he found something in one of those thousands of pages that confirmed that their DNA was not a part of DNA that they had collected from her.
Don't quote me on this, but there might have been a bit more to it than that. But imagine if this bit of evidence wasn't found. Right now, these guys could be rotting away in prison for some shit they didn't do.
And that DNA evidence is actually one of the major factors that they were exonerated, and that came out during Mike Nifong's trial. He was convicted, by the way, the district attorney, who had stood by her and had done many interviews about how she was raped so viciously.
And Gene, that school's lacrosse program was just smeared. I mean, and I'm sure suffered, and the school just suffered major reputational damage after that. Is there anything that could come as in part of the fallout of this? I mean, could there be some sort of lawsuit? I mean, I suppose there might not be much to sue for here. It doesn't sound like Crystal has a whole lot of assets on her.
Well, she's in prison. She's in prison right now for murder.
That is fucking wild. And like the guy in an earlier clip said, there's obviously something wrong with this woman. I mean, who does shit like this? I can't say that I followed this woman's story, so her catching a murder charge isn't something I ever saw coming.
And so that's true. There were several lawsuits at the time, one against Duke, another against Durham, the city of Durham. But now that she has come out on the record saying it, let's see legally what is available, because it has been almost 20 years, and I'm sure her resources are very, very sparse at this point. But we have tried to contact the 3 now men involved in this, their attorneys, and a local paper said that there are not comments at this point of their reaction to all of this.
I think this was a crazy story, and even though she was convicted of murder in 2013, she could be out as early as 2026, and I bet there'll be tons of interviews waiting for her, a few book publishing deals, and you can't rule out some sort of Netflix documentary. But honestly, nothing would make me sicker than if she started making bank off this whole thing. But what do you guys think of all this? That's it for today though, guys. But if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe because it really helps me out. And if I don't see you in the comments, I'll catch you on the next one.